Hello, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, whenever you might be catching us. Thank you so much for being with us today on the latest and greatest episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I am your host, Richard Watkins. And before we get started, because we do, I promise you, we have a very exciting, very special episode in store for you today. We have to give a huge shout out to the folks that make this all possible, the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN, standing at the intersection of education, innovation, and health. SPAN is your partner leading you into the future with confidence and a world of innovation. If you're looking to learn more about SPAN, visit SPAN at span-inc.org. That's span-inc.org. But without further ado, now with that out of the way, today's guest on the Richard Watkins Podcast is a champion for equity, education, and empowerment. Kimberly Jones is the 2023 Burroughs Wellcome Fund North Carolina Teacher of the Year and has been shaping minds and inspiring futures as a high school English teacher at Chapel Hill High School since 2006. A proud graduate of Wake Forest University, Kimberly holds a bachelor's in English and a master's in education. Her career has centered on teaching world literature with a deep commitment to Holocaust and human rights education, work that extends beyond the classroom. She serves as a regional site director for the Olga Lingiel Institute, a national nonprofit dedicated to Holocaust and human rights education, and as an education consultant for PBS at both the state and national levels. Through these roles, Kimberly supports education across the country in creating meaningful, culturally relevant lessons that empower students to shape a better world. Her work is grounded in the belief that literature, history, education are tools, not just for knowledge, but for transformation. Kimberly, thank you so very much for being with us today. Hopefully, I got it right in the bio. What did I leave out?
Nothing, nothing. In fact, I was like, oh my God, is he going to read that whole bio? And I was like, where did he get that? But no, everything was absolutely accurate. And thank you for taking the time to share that all that out.
I like reading out loud. I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
Ever since I was a little kid, I
I'm a
love like
fan. I'm a
reading.
fan. The English teacher in me.
Huge shout out, huge shout out. Yeah. All right. There was a lot there, a lot to unpack. But let's start from the beginning, right?
Mhm.
How did Kimberly Jones get into education? And when you first started thinking about it, did you know that you would be recognized as the greatest educator in the state?
So I'm gonna push back first on the premise of that question. I'm very honored to have served as North Carolina State Teacher of the Year. Um, but I am under no illusions that I'm the greatest educator in our state. One of the amazing opportunities that Teacher of the Year afforded me was the chance to travel our state and to see my colleagues in action. And I was left equally in awe and in inspiration after every school visit. There are miracle workers working in our public schools from Murphy to Manteo, oftentimes with far less resources than they need, certainly less compensation than they deserve. And I'm very proud to be one of the over 100,000 who are showing up every day for our kids. Um, with that being said, my journey to education certainly did not begin with the idea that I would be recognized at such a level. At this point in my career, I think like most people, I went through phases in terms of my journey to education. One of the opportunities I had as Teacher of the Year is the chance to keynote at different events. And if you've heard one of my more common keynotes, you got the chance to learn a little bit about my ed journey, that it started on the front porch of the double wide trailer I grew up in the Sand Hills of North Carolina. My mom was my first teacher, and she She worked third shift at a local textile factory. Like lots of working class families, we could not afford daycare. And so my mom would work third shift. She would come home, catch a couple of hours and nap, and then she would lean into preschool with me on the front porch. And I got excited. She was just such a phenomenal early childhood educator for me. She made me excited to learn, to master numbers and letters, and she celebrated those small wins. She created a, an authentic love of learning. I really quickly realized that even as a little kid, when you knew things, you had things to talk about that people would be willing to listen to. And I think like all little kids, you wanted to be in conversation. I think a lot of the times when we're young, you can feel like the world is happening to you, that you don't have a lot of agency. And learning and school was one of those places, and one of the avenues that I discovered really quickly gave me agency in the world. The more I learned, the more I had to talk about, the more people would be willing to listen to me when I had facts to contribute, as base level as they were. And that drove my thirst for knowledge, that I wanted to have a voice that people listened to. I wanted to have a voice that contributed to the world, and that required me to know things. And so I leaned into school, and by the time it was time to go to college, education, while I loved my teachers and had had a phenomenal time in school, I was well aware of the sad fact that teachers were not paid well. And I wanted to be a very successful, highly paid adult. And I didn't think that teaching was that avenue. So I went off to college, knowing that I would be an English major, which I think deeply concerned my family because they were like, but what are you going to do with that? But what are you going to do with that? I was like, I'm going to read books. I'm going to write papers. And they're like, yes, we get what English means, but what are you going to do with it? Um, Rightfully so. They were also concerned about what my financial and professional future would look like with an English degree. And so I very quickly learned that I was allowed to be an English major if I said, oh, I'm going to go to law school. I literally looked up, I was like, what do English majors do? And they're like, well, English is a degree that many people pursue prior to entering the legal profession. So I just decided, yeah, I'm going to be an English major, and then I'll go to law school. And they're like, oh, so you'll be an attorney. We get that. That's a real job. Cool. By sophomore year, Richard, I very quickly knew I had been very, very blessed to be mentored by a series of judges and attorneys who allowed me to shadow them in court. And after 2 years and summers spent in district and circuit and federal court, I knew there was no part of me that wanted any parts to do with the legal profession. And then it became, oh crap, what am I going to do? Because English major. And it was still what I was most passionate about. And in my junior year, I had a friend who was in the Master Teaching Fellows program at Wake Forest. And he was a fellow African American English major. And he was like, Kim, there's this phenomenal program in the education department. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know if I want to teach. He's like, Kim, it is a fellowship. And I was like, yeah, but he's like, they will pay for you to get this degree. And I had an intake interview, and so much of my life has been the kindness and the grace and the providence of God in my life. But that has come through just exceptional mentors, incredible teachers, and people who took the time to have conversations with me, to answer the questions, of an uncertain 20-year-old. And I had the most phenomenal intake interview with a professor at Wake who had actually been the executive director of the North Carolina Governor's School when I attended. So we had a pre-existing relationship, and we talked for maybe 2.5 hours in his office. And God knows what that man actually needed to be doing that day. But he took the time and he asked me lots of questions and he answered all the questions I had. And I told him about my concerns about, that I wanted to be someone who could help make the world better. And I knew teachers did that, but I wanted to have a platform. And he was like, Kim, every day you're going to stand in front of a captive audience of change makers and future leaders. And you are going to equip them with the skills to read, to comprehend, to express themselves, to analyze, to collaborate. There is no greater platform to influence the world than education. And by the end of that conversation, he had welcomed me to the graduate program. And I was excited. And over that year of getting my master's, I found my teacher persona. I found or I guess in some ways returned to my passion for learning and teaching and pedagogy and andragogy and the social emotional learning and development of young people and the innate power that exists in education. And when I left graduate school, I was so excited. I was so excited. I knew this was what I was supposed to do. Now, knowing your purpose and having the skill to carry it out are not the same things. And like any first year educator, oh, I questioned my calling many days because there is no amount of degrees, there's no amount of dissertation or research. I love Harry Wong as much as anybody else, but there's only so much the first 100 days of school is going to give you when you are 23 standing in front of 19-year-olds, and and they know that you are only one day ahead of them in the reading, in the work, that you are teaching a novel that you may have never read, and if you did, it was 5 years ago when you were in high school yourself, and you're trying to present yourself as this expert, as this leader, and no one has, and I tell anybody, this is the thing that I love about teaching high school. Nobody has a better BS meter than a teenager. They know when you are on, they know when you are off, they know when you have it together, they know when you're flying by the seat of your pants. And there is something in that level of accountability that you are either going to sink or swim. And by God, if you learn to swim against a current that strong, you know that this is for you. And once you get through that first year, you realize I can do this. It's not necessarily going to be easy. It's not necessarily going to be what they trained me to do, but I'm capable. And you're going to have those days where you win. And that's what keeps you in the fight. That's what keeps you going. That's what keeps you going to the professional development. That's what keeps you, adding on areas of your licensure, pursuing certifications because you want to be your best because they're going to demand it of you.
Wait, hold on, hold on. You dropped so many nuggets. How did you find out that teenagers have excellent BS detectors? What BS were you trying to push over and push past these kids? They're like, wait 1 second, my
I think
BS
it's
meter is going off.
I don't think it was just me. I think, honestly, Richard, I truly credit young people. I think it has to do with where they are in the world. I know when I was in high school, you are in that place of transition from adolescence into young adulthood, and you want it so bad. You want to be independent. You want to have your own voice and your own beliefs, but you are looking at the adults around you, judging and trying to figure out what kind of person you want to be. And so much of how we see the world, I think, when we are teenagers is about finding truth. Because at the point that you are a young adult, between 14 and 18, you are starting to see really, I think, profound truths about the world. You are starting to see that not every adult who stands in front of you and says something or gives a directive is living by that directive themselves. And you're old enough to see those incongruencies, even if you're not old enough to speak on them yet. And the power of seeing those incongruencies, of learning by observation as well as by direction, I think that has a really profound effect on kids. And if you want to be an adult that they trust, if you want to be an adult that they actually look to and they respect and they see as a mentor or as a guidepost, you have to be aware of that. And so when I say, y'all, I need you to be prepared, I need you to come in, I need you to have the materials you need for school, that means when we're going over something and you're asking me a question about a text, and I've only read the chapter you're on and the one next, and you're asking a question about foreshadowing, I can't BS an answer because I haven't read that far in the book. I can't tell you if this is foreshadowing because I don't know. Because I'm teaching this class, I'm teaching another class, I'm reading two books at once, and I'm trying to map out what the end of this unit is going to look like while I'm also thinking about paying back college loans and trying to find an apartment on my own and navigating young adulthood. And there were moments where, yes, I gave you a quiz on Tuesday. I said I would have it graded by Friday. That didn't happen. I can't just walk in class and a kid asks me, "Hey, Miss Jones, do you have that quiz graded?" And I'm like, "What quiz?" I don't. Well, you said you'd have it graded by Friday. I'm like, I don't recall that. Like, part of holding on to those the I guess the truth and the trust in that relationships and to go, y'all, I know I promised this quiz by Friday, but last night my mom called and she needed me to help her reset the Wi-Fi in our house. So I did not get these quizzes graded, but I promise you I will have them by Monday. And if that means I have to sacrifice Saturday night going out with my girls to keep my word of what I'm going to deliver to my students, that's what I had to do. I just had to be honest about my capacity as an educator. Or if a kid literally asked me a question about something that I'd never considered, you are the first group of children I have ever taught. I am not inherently going to have all of these answers, but I had an exceptional mentor teacher, and I would even let them know, y'all, give me a minute, give me a day. I need to investigate this. I need to research that. A kid might ask me a complex grammar question. I'm an English major, but if they're like, "But Miss Jones, why do I, why do they use parallel structure here instead of this other grammar construction?" I'm not gonna pull an answer, out of thin air. I'm not gonna BS you. I am going to research and find a reasonable and accurate answer. I'm going to talk to a more experienced colleague. And when you do get an answer from Ms. Jones, it's going to be the right one. I'm not going to lose my credibility by feigning credibility that I don't have. And that was a really powerful breakthrough because my students realized that I was going to be authentic. And what I knew, and what I didn't know, I was going to find out. But I was also going to hold them to that same level of accountability, of vulnerability, and honesty. And those first few years of, I think for all of us, of digging it out of the mud when you're a beginning teacher, I think even when we become veteran teachers, we need to hold on to that humility. We need to hold on to that humility of, yes, there's a whole bunch I know, but while I'm in year 20, I'm in year one of teaching this group of kids because I've never had this group of kids before. I've never had this specific micro generation of learners who've seen and experienced the world they have. And so their needs are going to be unique. And I have to walk in with the same, I guess, not nervousness, because of course with time and with growth you become far more competent, but I need to come in with the same humility every year with a new group of learners as I had to have that first year. I think it keeps you honest. I think it keeps you fresh. I think it keeps you relevant and responsive to the unique needs of your students. And it keeps things fresh. It keeps me on my toes and excited because I want to understand this group of learners, um, and meet their unique needs. And that requires me to, yes, come in with the skill and the experience I have, but also to come in just as curious about these kids as I was in 2006 with my first set of students in the first period on the first day of school.
Quick question.
Mhm,
Coming through English, who did you and I know it might be all right, let's back up a little. One of my favorite writers
mhm,
is Ernie Pyle. I think I
mhm,
said that right.
mhm,
And I just thought his writings were amazing. And then also as a writer, he would be on the ground during World War II, I believe,
mhm,
and he died during World War II. And I thought this added to just his aura and so on and so forth.
mhm.
So I think my question is twofold, right? And I think we're kind of transitioning into something that
Yeah.
I'm curious about. One, who is one of your favorite writers?
Mhm.
And two, now this is going to seem completely disconnected, but I really want to hear how you tackle this. One of your places of expertise is discussing human rights
Mhm.
and discussing the Holocaust, right?
Mhm.
So I mentioned Ernie Pyle
Mhm.
as a terrific transition to talk about writing, but also to talk about the context in which he was writing in,
Mhm.
which was human rights atrocities, left,
Mhm.
right, and center,
Mhm.
all over the place.
Mhm.
And lastly, and I know I'm just throwing a lot
No, that's
at
fine.
you, but I'm just basically, none of this is scripted. So I'm thinking out
Yeah,
loud.
go for it.
Another thing that you said, which I also found was really interesting, is you were discussing teenagers, they're developing their BS meter because they're really measuring up the world around them. Is
Yes.
it what I have been told? You know, is it what I have been told it is, right? But you start having conversations with students, I'm imagining,
Mhm.
about human rights violations
Mhm.
and about the Holocaust. And
Mhm.
they have to, many of them, not all of them,
Yeah.
many have to probably come to the point where, wait, this world isn't exactly what I thought it was, which I think
Mhm.
is at the core of education.
Mhm.
What is that experience like? That's got to be a powerful moment. I know I threw a lot at you. I'm so
No, no, no,
sorry,
no.
but yeah.
I think I can map through all of them. So to part one, a writer who motivates me, who I just love his voice. And he actually even wrote about education. He's got a seminal work that I would share with anybody listening. It's James Baldwin and his talk to
Oh, I
teachers.
love James Baldwin. I'm so sorry. I love James. I even like watching him debate, not only
Yes,
his
yes,
writing, but I love his rhetoric as
yes,
well. James Baldwin
exactly,
is up there.
exactly.
Sorry. Yes.
No, no, yeah. So James Baldwin is, probably high on my pantheon of writers. As a speaker overall, his attitude around the purpose of education. He wrote an essay to teachers in the 60s, and I still think it is one of the most cogent arguments for what education should look like and the purpose it should serve and the relationship that students should have to teachers and the role that education serves in the lives of young people in a very honest, forthright, and inspiring way. I include excerpts from it in some of my keynotes, but James Baldwin, writer. In terms of writers around human rights and the Holocaust, um, one of the earliest voices that just struck through with the clarity in which he writes about the human condition was Elie Wiesel. I'm also a fan of a writer, a Holocaust survivor by the name of Primo Levi, who writes with a directness of voice that even in a world that is just rife with technological distractions and diversions, the honesty in with which Primo Levi writes meets every single one of my kids wherever they are. There is a directness of voice. He wrote as a young man, and there is something unique about the voice of young writers, about teenagers, and how they write in this very direct and honest way about some of the most severe experiences that one might encounter that reaches through to my students. I include a lot of memoir. There is a great compilation of diaries of young people from the Holocaust called Salvaged Pages, and is collections from letters, diaries of young people living through this. But I also like to pair it with letters and writings from young people who are currently living in the midst of human rights crises around the world. And back to that idea about kids and their BS meter, memoir has a way of shaking away a lot of the skepticism that I think young people can bring to a text that this is or this isn't for me. We are reading someone's writing about their own life in a period of transition, in a period of crisis, even if it's just, a memoir about the summer my parents got divorced and I had to move from LA to South Carolina, and what that change was like, or what the trip across the country was like, or listening to an Indigenous writer write about their experience at a boarding school and the experience they faced in having their language or their religion or their culture removed from them. Contemporary pieces about, young people and their experiences with mental health, or a search for identity in worlds that aren't, in societies that aren't always welcoming to who they are and how they see the world. I have found that even with the distance of time, as we begin to unfortunately lose members of the greatest generation, we don't have as many World War II veterans who could come in and speak. We don't have as many actual first generation survivors of the Holocaust or these other human rights crises around the world to give their lived perspective. But even through use of interviews, of podcasts, of these people's books and worlds, there is a universal truth. I fundamentally believe that every young person can find, but also in my classroom, while the Holocaust and anti-Semitism is one version of human rights violation and one example of genocide and oppression, I make it very clear to my kids very early on in the year that this is in no way a hierarchical structure of oppression or experience, that all oppression is linked, that there are systematic norms that show up anytime people are being marginalized. There are patterns to systemic oppression that we have the power to recognize and take action, active action against. While we can't go back and change the lowest points of our behavior as human beings, we have the ability to be vigilant in our efforts to ensure that they do not occur again, and to be loud and intentional in our vocal opposition to oppression, to discrimination. And in addition to that, one thing I do want to make clear is that I also, in teaching these things, I think a lot of times people get nervous about the depths of depravity that they might have to explore. But it's really critical for me as a Holocaust educator, as a human rights educator, that I make clear to my students that the people who were being persecuted at any time in any situation we look at, if we're looking at, Sudan, if we're looking at Kosovo, if we're looking at American chattel slavery, if we're looking at the Holocaust, if we're looking at the Trail of Tears, that there was a culture there prior to these people's oppression, that they are not defined, neither the people, their culture, their identity, or their worth. It is not defined by the evils that were done to them, and that there was a culture, however reduced, however persecuted, however marginalized, that existed and thrived after this persecution. That there are Jewish communities that are contributing to the world in profound ways today. That there are indigenous people in this country contributing to this version of America in profound ways. That chattel slavery, while a horrible, a horrible truth in the history of this country, African Americans, Black citizens in this country and around the diaspora have shown resilience and triumph, innovation, revitalization in incredible ways that continue to contribute to the world we live in today. That while these horrors are worthy of our study and our remembrance, they are not the full story of what happened to any of these people, nor should they be the limits of our learning about these people or their culture.
One more time for folks who are listening, we're talking to Kimberly Jones, 2023 Burroughs Welcome North Carolina Teacher of the Year. This, all right, again, trying to formulate this question
Yeah.
as I'm saying it, which is not
No,
always the
that's
best. Sometimes you want to really figure out the question, write it down,
I
then
understand.
ask it.
I
But
understand,
I'm
Richard.
just
You're
going to do
fine.
it,
You're
freestyle this
fine.
question. So, a lot of times, and a lot of people, and I think they are justified in thinking so, that education is absolutely critical to not repeating the mistakes, atrocities of the past. Education is central to that. Learning about society, learning about
Mhm.
so many different things is critical in preventing some of these atrocities. I'm just wondering how do you think, or how do you square the circle when when these atrocities and the depths of depravity of World War II and the Holocaust occurred in Germany, which at the time, globally, which
Mhm.
was considered the pinnacle
Oh, we
of
absolutely,
science,
no,
art, and
yeah,
education.
absolutely.
How can well-educated people, right? And I think this is perfect for you because
Yeah.
you're bringing all this together
Yeah.
in a place with such high intellect, such well-educated people. How can they then do such bad things? How does that happen to a society?
So I think there's lots of factors that allow that to happen. One of the things I lean in with my students is from day one, this idea of who is my community and who am I accountable to? And there is a process of dehumanization that has to take place in order for us to get to the point of genocide and murder. We don't start with camps. We don't start with ghettos. We start with dehumanizing language. We start with vilifying people through untruths and rumors and unsubstantiated claims. We start by abandoning fact and choosing a fiction that makes us more comfortable. We start by othering people and allowing other people to be othered. We fail to see the humanity in our fellow man. They are not us. And so clearly they don't have the same worth. They don't have the same inherent, um, they don't love the way we love. They don't worship the way we worship. They don't believe the way we believe. They don't share the same politics that we do. And we allow these differences of identity to begin to create a hierarchy of humanity that unless you dress this way and eat this way and believe this way and love this way and vote this way, you are not a full person. And one of the things I try to do in my classroom from day one is establish the inherent humanity of everybody in here. That it is going to be the respect with which I treat you, the respect in which we regard each other, how we speak to each other, how we interact with each other. I'm under no illusion or disillusionment that we are all going to be best buddies. That's not what I require. What I do require is a baseline of respect, consideration, and concern, and that we work through when we have moments of conflict, but we work through it with a shared and mutual respect and dignity. And we do not allow a lack of knowledge about a person, a thing, a place to be replaced with problematic, stereotypical, or dehumanizing conjecture. In the absence of fact, we don't allow people to fill it in. Well, I heard those people do this, or I heard those people don't even do this. Well, have you met one of those people? Well, no, but that's what I heard. Well, who'd you hear it from? Was it one of those people? So why would I give the authority to a rumor, to a stereotype, to a derogatory comment, to a slur, for something that I don't know myself? And that's what I tell my students. Part of our responsibility as people is to lean into knowledge. The path of ignorance is broader, it is well paved, and it's full of simple answers to complex questions. But that is not the truth. And in a world where it is very easy to choose lies and stereotypes and derogatory opinions about people, instead of doing the real work of learning, of listening, of investigating for yourself, for young people who are all about their independence, why would you farm out your knowledge to somebody else? You can't tell me, well, I'm a grown man or I'm a grown woman if you're afraid to think for yourself. And you're not willing to push back against things you know to be inaccurate. And I think I mean, there were many factors going on, of course, in Germany in wake of World War II. Sorry, in the midst of World War II, specifically in the wake of things like the Great Depression. I do think that contextual pressures in the face of those very real stressors, I do think people abandon reason, fact, knowledge for comfort. If I've got somebody in front of me in the midst of the lowest economic point, we've lost World War One, the whole world is in the midst of a Great Depression. I've got someone making these grandiose promises about how great life is going to be. And they've given me a scapegoat that allows me to remove things like any personal responsibility that I might have carried for my economic status. If there's someone going, no, the choices you've made, none of those are really what created this reality. What created this reality is this group of people or that group of people. And if only we took care of those people, we got rid of those people, everything would be great. Desperate people will pick up an answer that makes them feel good. Everybody wants a serotonin boost. Everybody wants a little opium to get through the day. And if hatred of a specific group of people makes me quote unquote feel better or feel like I belong or it puts me in the party of power, there were well-meaning ordinary men who abandoned what they knew to be right for the sake of belonging, for access, for power, under the false claims of a charismatic leader. And one of the things I lean into my kids is these lies are easy. They're so comfortable. Believing that my life sucks because somebody with a different accent, somebody who believes a different way, somebody who loves a different way is in my way. Everybody wants a cop out. Everybody wants the easy way to explain the ills of the world, but we know that dog done hunt. We know if you put that under the light of truth, it does not stand up. We know that,
Did you say
Richard.
dog don't hunt?
Yes, that dog done hunt. I'm from the sand hills of North Carolina, and sometimes the metaphor is the best way
No,
to put it.
no, I love it. but I mean, yeah, but man, it's hard. You said
It
something
absolutely
there.
is.
You said something on there. You were like, I'm a grown man, or I'm a grown woman. I don't have to think. And you're like really encouraging people. No, think critically. You don't have to think like everyone else. One of the one of the things that I love social psychology. I'm a virologist, so I study
Yeah.
viruses, but I love all types of sciences. And I can't remember, maybe if you're listening and just please put it in the chat because I can't remember who did the study, but it was kind of like a social psychology study where individuals would hold up cards. And I believe the study went, the cards would have a certain number of lines on them. And they would bring in a study participant, and that participant would be sitting on a panel with like seven actors. So they weren't participants, they were actors. So there's only one participant. And the person would hold up the sign and ask everyone, how many lines do you see? And like, say, for instance, there's only 3 lines. All of the actors would say there were 4 lines. The participant who clearly sees that there are 3, clearly sees it, because of the pressure of the other participants, there was a high likelihood that though they saw 3, they would say 4,
Hmm.
because the other participants, quotation marks, because they're actors in this case, because they said 4, the participant, despite what they know to be true, would also say 4. That's a, whew,
And
that's,
and that is especially now, I think now more than ever, when I joke with some of my friends, but like when anybody with, $20 can buy a webcam and a microphone and suddenly they are an influencer, what is the litmus test for whether or not you should listen to this person? Where is the credibility? How do you, what is your vetting for these people that you were choosing to listen to and why? Like, if you saw this person in an alley and they were telling you the same thing, would you believe them? Like, if this person were your random uncle at the family reunion telling you this same story, would you give it credence? Why not? Well, because he didn't know what he's talking about, or he's always talking out his.
what is it just the South? But why are Southern uncles never trustworthy? I just don't know why.
I'm just saying, I
Every
mean,
story is
I
like,
don't want to
oh,
say all uncles, but we all have that uncle or that cousin, like who saw something, who saw something, who saw something, who maybe saw it on, Facebook. And
the
they,
the person's name is Solomon Ash in the 1950s. So they wanted to investigate social pressure, and so they did that experiment. And it said around 75% of the participants conformed at least once
yes,
to the incorrect group consensus. So 3 out of 4 times. That is extraordinary pressure.
absolutely it is. And again, now when we're looking at young people, when that pressure exists in a space that you can't even always access with them, when it exists in this virtual space, when they are building an algorithm every day about what to feed you, your ability to critically analyze these sources, these voices, these viewpoints, and these opinions, and not just against fact, but against your own morality, against a universal, if you want to hold up the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and go, does this belief pass the test that says all people deserve food and water and shelter and access to health care and the opportunity? Does it pass the Bill of Rights? Does it pass, the preamble to our Constitution, this idea of who we're allowed to be in this country? Does it respect an egalitarian view of the innate worth of human life? And one of the things I talk to with pre-service teachers, it's one of my favorite things to do. I'm often asked the question, Well, what do you think a teacher needs, Miss Jones? Like, what do you have to be a good educator? Or how do I know if teaching is for me? In addition to whatever your love for the topic is, that's not going to get you through in this career. It can't even be a love of kids because quite honestly, kids ain't always lovable. Full stop. In order to persist in this work, to any great length, you have to have an innate love and appreciation for humanity because that's what's walking through your door every day. From whether they are coming from a trailer park or a cul-de-sac, whether they rode on the school bus, the city bus, or they were dropped off late 20 minutes into class by a random neighbor or family member. Humanity is what's walking through your door. And humanity is not always pretty. It's not always thankful. It's not always nice. It's not always clean. It doesn't always have the right language for school. It doesn't always have number two pencils sharpened. It's not always emotionally self-regulated. But that's one of the things I love and value about public education because we accept, we educate, we empower, we invest in every child that walks through that door. And if you have, when you can find it, and sometimes you got to go out in the world and refill that cup, but when you see the inherent worth and you truly believe that every kid deserves a shot at a productive and a purposeful future, and you know that you are providing them with some level of skill, a tool that allows them to pursue that, you're willing to work through those days when humanity is humanity. When a teenager who is going through a growth spurt and emotional dysregulation, whose hormones are bouncing off of every surface in the room, when you have the steadfast belief that there is a productive and principled adult somewhere in that mass of bone and muscle, and I have, 1 year, I have one semester with them to till that ground and maybe make it a little softer for the next teacher so they can plant a seed. When you understand that inherent nature of our work, it doesn't make the hard days easy. It doesn't. But it does call you back to your purpose with an honesty that reminds you that this work was never going to be easy because you're working with people.
And people gone people. People gone people.
And some
Listen,
days you are that person that is
yeah,
personing. Like,
I people on a daily basis. On a daily
Richard,
basis, I should wear a sign and like warning. Today, I am going to people. I'm gonna people today. I will
yes,
say this: if I could just sum up just everything, and maybe this is not accurate, but
yeah,
according to the greatest teacher in North Carolina, 2023, teacher of the year.
yes,
She
sir,
doesn't say it, but I'll say it.
yes,
Oh,
sir.
and also, one of the really cool things is that you were also given a shout out at the governor's state of the state address, which
I
was
I
also like,
was I
I
was
was
very,
like,
very thankful.
live vicariously through you. I was like, wow,
Thank you,
wow.
friend.
I felt
Thank
like
you,
he was
friend.
giving me a shout out because I knew you. I'm like,
That part. No, I was
oh,
standing up for everyone. That was all of us. That was
that's
our
all.
win.
That was awesome. But I wanted to touch on something in all seriousness. I feel like you just said to be a teacher, you must have a love for humanity. A lot of folks that I spend a lot of time with on Sundays would say that's agape. I might have said that wrong. Might
I
have said
know,
that right.
absolutely. It is. No, that's right.
Right. Yeah, just that love for a person because they are a person. And I think if I were just to make sure folks understood one of the through lines of this entire conversation, it is that to
It
be
is.
a teacher, an educator, a love of humanity. I want to ask one more question, and this is, a chess pass to you. Put the ball in your court. I have the blessing, the honor, the privilege of interviewing the greatest minds just in the world. They're humble, so they oftentimes would not accept that label that I put on them. But you all are truly, you specifically, thought leaders. But what happens after this time flies by like that is I kick myself because I'm like, oh, why didn't I ask that question? Or I should have followed that up, or something like that. And I worry that you were probably preparing and hoping to receive an answer that you didn't get. So at the end of every um, podcast episode, I want to ask our guest, and I want to ask you, what question should I have asked?
Oh my
I
gosh.
I know that's hard. I like ending like that, like throwing the ball in your court.
I
What
will
question should
say,
I have asked?
I will say, um, why why should anybody do this?
That is a good question because I have been a teacher for college. And when I hear kids packing up their book bags
Hmm.
15 minutes
Yeah,
before, I ask myself, why why would anybody do this? Or I get a teacher evaluation. Why would anybody do this?
exactly. Exactly. And why public school? Why am I doing this in a public school? Um, Aside from my love of humanity, because I fear that in a society that is growing ever more isolated by choice and and privilege and access, that our greatest markers of society have been the things we have accomplished when we have come together. And public school brings us together. It allows us to have a common goal. It allows children from across all of these different socioeconomic levels and identities and abilities and beliefs to come together and pursue shared goals, to play on the same teams, to perform on the same stages in drama or in band or in dance, to accomplish things together, to see that diversity truly is our strength, to understand that there is, more than one way to do something, that there are multiple ways to be happy and productive and effective as an adult, that there are lots of world views that inspire people to do the same thing, that there are other words for agape love that non-religious people use to guide their beliefs, that there are multiple ways to reach a positive outcome. And because one of the things we do so well foundationally, one of the things we say we believe, specifically in this nation, in this country, under the laws of this nation, is that your foundation is not the only determiner of your outcome, that your beginning does not equal your end. And everyday public school provides that doorway. It gives kids windows to worlds they've never seen before. It gives them mirrors that affirm who they are and the worth and the beauty and the talents and the skills that they bring to the table. But it sits us at a common table because the problems in this world are going to affect us all. You do not escape. Um, you do not escape the ills of the world. The children we do not educate today are the adults we will have to contend with tomorrow. And if there is not a sound, basic education that is provided free and fair to the general public without tuition, application, scholarship, fee, or discrimination, our nation, our world has no hope. We are on the front line of securing and creating the world that our kids, our grandkids are going to live in, the worlds we are going to grow old and pass away in. And I fundamentally believe that when it is firing on all cylinders, when it is well funded, when it is well staffed, when it is well sourced, when it is reflective of the diversity of the community, there is no better investment, return on investment than public education. It remains the best investment we can make today and for tomorrow. And when they are well funded, when they are well staffed, when they are appropriately resourced, nobody gets it better. Nobody. I will put my name, my career, and my money on it. Nobody gets it better than public schools because we are doing the real work of culture change, of education, of social and innovation and advancement across the board. And my students are the number one example of that. This morning, we're in the midst of an altered schedule, so you may have heard bells or bings or announcements a little bit in the back. But today we're in the middle of a school-wide celebration called Tiger Fest, where we bring in speakers from around the community, and they run these sessions where kids can come in and learn about everything from cake decorating to how to be a lobbyist to how to change the oil in their car. It's a very fun day. But this morning, one of my friends and I ran a session where our kids came in and they made cards for people living in nursing homes or assisted living situations. And in a world where so many things are being said about young people, the fact that we had a room of 12 or 15 young people who on purpose chose to come and create cards to send positive messages to elderly people, the kids are all right. All is not lost. This is not a lost generation. They are different. They have different needs. They are living in different realities. But the fact that 16-year-olds chose on a Wednesday morning to come in and do something a little creative and send some positivity into the world, that is my proof that we are getting it right, that we have the ability to get it right. And that kind of investment, that seeing someone else's humanity says, what I'm doing is working. And I'm sending good, thoughtful young people out into the world who see and consider and think about the well-being of someone not like them, someone in a completely different phase of life. And all over our state, all over our nation, today, right now, there are public schools fostering those kinds of positive skills, beliefs, and outcomes for our students.
Wow. Well said.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you so much, Kimberly Jones. This is Kimberly Jones, 2023 Teacher of the Year, Burroughs Wellcome Fund, Chapel Hill High School. This has been the Richard Watkins Podcast. Thank you all for joining us today. And remember, the future isn't something to wait for, it is something to build. Thank you all so much and take care.